as a kid, I was quite unhappy with what I was given in terms of my quote-unquote heroic archetypes. My desire really came from a need to create heroic archetypes for Black people. And in order to do that, you need to dig into history.
I think for both of us, as well as I think for the people who were attracted to the project, it was a question of where do you come from and where do you draw your heritage from? And in the event that you can't trace that, you need to make that.
You know, growing up as one of the first Model Cs back in the day, you know, you grow up around practically westernized white culture, right? And you start getting into the heroic archetypes. The things I was reading and the things I was being told was that the Black man is the oldest in the family, right? So my question was always, if we're the oldest, what the hell have we been doing all this time?
The spark that ignited that was for Jahmil as a creative also to go, as a Xhosa man, as an African man, my history can't just span a couple of 100 years, you know? There has to be something more.
And then I started getting more curious around that and delved into how long has man been on this earth? And by evidence, let's just say conventional evidence, maybe between about 200 years, 200,000 years we've been around this planet. So what have we been doing in that period of time? Are you telling me we have been so unevolved that all we've been thinking in this continent as Black people for close on to 200,000 years is about posturized living with cattle and mud huts? As a look for me aesthetically didn't satisfy me, you know? To such a point I was a bit ashamed because I was thinking, am I too locked into Western archetypes of castles and all of this heritage that they seem to have, that we didn't have? So that was always a thing for me.
What has been evident to us in our journey as creatives is this question of identity. And coming from South Africa, I think is a very specific kind of recipe in terms of looking at your ancestry and looking at your history and understanding who you are. Because we've had such a tumultuous history, I think for majority of people of color, it's difficult to trace back your heritage. And what does that do to you in terms of what you're brought up on, the media that you consume, the heroes that you formulate when you're watching content? And so what we wanted to do with this was to propose something more, to propose an idea of a world, an idea of a history, an idea of a life, because really that's what history is, it's stories. And in collaboration with what we did know and what we could research, we wanted to present a continental proposition of fantasy that could potentially aid in how the viewer constructs their own identity and what gives themselves a sense of pride of where they could have possibly come from.
We find ourselves having to play catch up on many levels as Africans, you know? On the technological front, I think access to technology speeds up certain things, but also we need to be careful that we don't get eroded in others. And what I mean by that is it's about trying to translate some of our culture into the mechanisms of the fourth industrial space. We need to have a voice and a language in that space. We need to find coding in our indigenous languages, otherwise they're going away. I can't preserve it in how I think in English. I can't preserve it in the way that I communicate, you understand? But I can explore it, I can study it, I can praise it, and I can preserve it in my work.
And also, the languages that we are using, we did our best to use as pure a form of them, but also we are fully aware that these are not probably the languages in the form that they existed in the period we're talking about, and that's where I think we've drawn a lot of creative license in terms of that. But it's still important because those are the languages that we need to preserve today.
And that's why, for me, it's important to create heroic archetypes that the little black kid can look at and think greatness, think impossibility. For too long, we've been sitting in that prism of having to be, confined in thinking. But now all that shit's over now. People don't talk about it, but things like Star Wars did a lot for westernized white culture. Why? Because it gives them the possibilities of conquering the stars. So these images are important. And for me, what Blood Psalms does, it's not a definitive image. What it does is it just starts to get you thinking beyond the 600, 700 cloud you've been given by colonialism. You need to start opening your imagination to the other 200 and something thousand years that you've been here.
Chantal, the production designer, Msimbiti, the Eastern Cape locations manager, and Jahmil went on a 7-day spiritual expedition to these places to see if they could facilitate our vision.
We decided on very specific places, but we also decided that it will be in the journey that will tell us what's here and what story we want to tell.
But the places that they went to actually all came to me. I was looking for something on the internet and I came across a place called the Valley of Desolation. I said to them, go find this Valley of Desolation, because how could something be called that and not be epic, So it happened in that kind of way, and on their journey to the Valley of Desolation, they then found all the other key places. Guadana was something that I read about on our previous project, because I'm very much into studying witchcraft and all of those kinds of things. And I read that there's this town, not really a town, it's really just a location, that is rumored, specifically in Xhosa culture, to be the home of the witches. And it also has a feeling of being really ancient. And I think all those rocks that are there, which are very similar to Stonehenge, are something that have never been explored, and they definitely should indicate a civilization that is older than what we know there today. And it really did make sense, because that's a beautiful canvas in terms of looking at civilization pre-modernity, I guess.
What spoke the most was how old this land is. I think we take a lot of shit for granted. A lot of shit for granted. How often do you really ask yourself, how old is this fucking place? How old is Earth?
It was in that trip that the discussion started happening around the mythology of the show and how we would weave in all these different narratives and locations into what ultimately became Blood Psalms.